So the assessment itself is split into two components. And this was one of the unique things of Nidafer's theory and the assessment was it's one of the only ones that considers the role that concentration plays in performance. When you think about it, if you're trying to, you're trying to go out and shoot a low score in the golf course, how effectively you're managing your concentration or attention or focus is a huge contributing factor. Are you paying attention to the right things at the right time? And are you able to avoid getting distracted by irrelevant things? That's all a part of how our mind manages what we're paying attention to and how effectively we're paying attention to the right things. And so the assessment gets at how good is your concentration. And concentration is another part of the theory is it's not just a singular thing. It's not dad on the sideline screaming, hey, pay attention, focus. That is a component of it, but attention is more complicated than that, and understanding it is essential to being able to perform effectively and utilize the mental game. So I'm happy to go into the details of it a little bit, and I can use a golf example as a way of kind of illustrating what it's all about. So imagine that your attention varies along two dimensions. One dimension is width. And width is basically going from broad to narrow. Broad means I can pay attention to a lot of things simultaneously. Narrow means I'm focused down on just one thing. I'm looking at the golf ball as I'm standing over a putt. The other dimension is direction, and it goes from internal to external. Internal means I'm up inside my head. Thoughts, feelings, whatever other nonsense is going on up there, that's internal. External means I'm paying attention to the world around me. When you combine those two different dimensions, you end up with 4 different types of concentration. And we use sort of a channel analogy to illustrate that. So channel 1 would be broad and external at the same time. And so you can use it's kind of a pre-shot routine as a great example of it. So broad external is you've hit your drive, you walk up to it, and you start to gather data. You're looking at yardage. You're looking at the lie of the golf ball. You're looking at slope. You're trying to get a sense for where the pin is on the green. What's the wind doing? All of those variables that you're picking up that's going on in that external world is coming in through that broad external type of concentration. Once you've gathered all the data, then the next step is to tune to channel 2. And channel 2 is a broad internal channel. And this is where you take that data and you analyze it and come up with a plan. All right, I got 150 yards, so for me that's an 8-iron, and I got a little bit of wind behind me, so I got to be careful that I'm not going to overcook this one. And you start to formulate a plan based on the data that you've gathered. That's channel 2. Once you've formulated that plan, then you move to channel 3, which is kind of committing yourself to what the plan was that you just came up with. Some athletes will go through sort of an imagery exercise at that point in time. They're in their head and they're sort of watching themselves hit the shot that they've just planned on hitting. And then once that's done, then it's time to address the golf ball, and you need to shift into channel 4, which is a broad external type of focus. So that may be for some golfers, you're just going to stare at the golf ball, or there for some like when I'm playing well, what I'm trying to do is I'm standing over the golf ball is just imagine where the target is, nothing else. What you don't want to be doing when you're standing over the golf ball is thinking about executing the golf swing, because that's now taking you back into a channel 2, channel 3 sort of thing, and it's very difficult to perform effectively when you're doing that. It's okay to be doing that when you're practicing. I'm focusing on doing one thing. But when you're playing, you're either playing golf or you're playing golf swing. And when people are playing golf swing, they're trying to do things, and they're not using that channel 4 type of focus. The best the best performance is going to be when you can shut off all of that stuff and just really engage with the game and with the target as you're executing things. What you're trying to accomplish is sort of automatic type of performance. Just that where you're not thinking about doing anything other than just executing the shot. Not where is the club at the top of my backswing? What am I shifting my weight? All of those things are fine for practice. But if you're doing that while you're trying to play, you just have to accept the fact that you're not going to play your best play your best golf. So that kind of takes through the concentration piece of it. And again, effective playing is being on the right channel at the right time. So if you're standing over the golf ball and you realize that you're in your head and you're thinking about this or that, or don't do this or don't do that, that's a signal where you need to step away, start again. Okay, within the confines of not being ridiculously slow and pissing off your playing partners. But if you're serious about hitting the best shot you want to make sure that you're not engaged in the nonsense sort of stuff as you're standing over the golf ball. If you are, you just got to accept that you're probably not going to hit a great shot. The second part of the assessment really gets into more of the traditional sort of personality factors, things like self-confidence and tolerance for risk and communication style and people orientation, which aren't critical when you're thinking about a golfer, but in other types of performance they can be a big deal. Team sports, for example, certainly in the business world, those interpersonal skills are critically important. And so it's the interplay between those two. And what happens under pressure, what creates pressure for people, is oftentimes a result of those interpersonal factors and it contributing to a moment of doubt, essentially. That's what elevates pressure when you're standing there, whatever it is you're going to do, and what's going through your mind is, I don't know if I'm going to do this well. That's where pressure starts to get out of control and starts to impact everything else. Your body tightens up. It's difficult to execute smooth muscle movements under those conditions. That's the one where the 18th tee box and the guy's holding on to the golf club just a little too tightly, and all of a sudden he's in the woods on the right. The pressure has created a change in how the body is operating. It's no longer happening automatically because of that doubt and that nonsense. So we can look at those test results and basically say, these are the types of things that are going to take you out of your comfort zone. When you do, these are the types of mistakes that you're probably going to make. It does help us get at what are your mental game strengths. Mm-hmm. Those are fine to know. And anytime that you can be operating and taking advantage of those strengths, you're going to have an advantage. But the strengths are not going to be where your performance starts to decrease. It's those weak spots, it's those vulnerabilities. And so we're good at being able to get at what's going to get in your way, not what's going to make you good. That's fine. What's going to get in your way from being even better or more consistently good? And TACE is something that I've been using for 30 years now, and it's great at getting at those things.
That's fascinating. I want to jump back to the concentration part. So just so I have it right, so the channels are not. This isn't like a plot graph where you are, you have two of the qualities, external, internal, and broad and narrow, and you're plotted like you're good at these things. This is something you have to use all four and shift through, especially in the golfers. When we're talking about golf, you actually have to sort of make your way through the channels.
Sure. And
leverage each part of it.
What you'll see in somebody's profile is that certain parts of that concentration system are going to be stronger than others. So let's take the typical business leader. Okay. That person is usually going to be strongest in that analytical part of it, that broad internal planning, strategizing, big picture focus. Same thing with military officers. That's typically where their strength is. And they're good at what they do because that's what they get paid to do. If you're in charge of something, then it's that broad, big picture focus, that ability to plan and strategize and set others up for success that is really going to be the engine. You have to use the other ones, but what's going to be strong typically in the profile is that. You talk about individual sport athletes or military operators, it's that narrow type of focus that they tend to be best at. If you think about what it takes to develop world-class golfing abilities, well, you're out hitting golf balls forever and a day. And that requires a tremendous amount of focus to do that. I remember one time Nick Faldo describing one of the years when he won the Masters and being out there on Sunday and basically saying, all I was aware of was what was going on, within about 3 feet of me. And I depended upon Fanny, remember the female caddy that he had back in the day? She took care of everything else because I was right in here. Mm-hmm. And you think about a guy like Faldo, that was it. And those concentration abilities are then factored into what we call attentional style. And everybody's got a dominant attentional style. And so you think about three types of players in the game of golf. That person who's dominated by that broad external type of playing tends to be very instinctive and feel-based player. And so think of a Seve, for example, somebody who just was magical and creative in the way that he played the game, and played it by feel, not much for mechanics. And again, when field players start to struggle, things can really go to hell in a handbasket, right? And so the famous, I think it was St. Andrews of Seve out in the parking lot, basically, and getting up and down on one of the holes from beside a parked car, and that was just him at his best. The second style is much more of a thinking and an analytical style. So maybe you think about a Jack Nicklaus as a guy who was very famous for playing the game strategically, thinking his way around the golf course. And that's an individual who wants to understand the golf swing and have it make sense to them. And then the third style is really much more of that focused, action-oriented style, and that's the person who tends to be very technical in the way that they play the game. So think about a Nick Faldo, or think about the guys who are always tweaking and focused on little tiny things. So those three styles are really going to set up how the person approaches the game, and from a coaching standpoint, it provides some really great insight as to how that person is going to best learn. You don't want to take somebody who plays by feel and try to turn them into a mechanic. By the same token, you don't want to take somebody who's very good technically and get them thinking too much about things. So the test is really great at being able to illustrate that and what dominates that concentration style. And it's the same thing that's applied in the military as well as in the business world. How is that strength going to support what you do, and where is it going to get in the way?
So in that sense, is it, once that assessment's complete and you understand their dominant attention style, right? Would the player or athlete be best served developing the weaker parts of their attention style, or really figuring out how you can maximize your dominant side?
I think it's both. I think it's both. So somebody who is kind of oblivious to what's going on around them, doesn't have good awareness. Certainly, their game is going to benefit from getting a little bit better at that. Or somebody who isn't great on focusing on details and getting really down into the nitty gritty, their performance could probably be improved a little bit by enhancing that. What you're looking at is what are the demands being placed on the person in their performance environment. If I'm the CFO of a large corporation, the psychological demands that are being placed on me are very different than somebody who's trying to make money on the PGA Tour. The environment and the game you're playing is what determines what's needed. And then we take a look at what you bring on board with your mental game and say, okay, well, this is going to help because this is important in the environment. But what's also important is something that maybe you're not all that strong in. And that becomes an area of improvement. Typically, what we're trying to do with the concentration piece of it is eliminate a tendency towards getting distracted. So the test also measures, are you making mistakes because your mind wanders? And there are different types of distractions. One is, something's going on around me, like a squirrel just ran by, right? Or a shiny object. And all of a sudden now I'm focused on that. And I don't really get paid to watch squirrels. And so if I'm paying attention to the squirrel, I can't be paying attention to what I'm supposed to be paying attention to. There are internal distractions. I talked before about the nonsense that goes on, all of that thinking. If I'm caught up thinking about those things, I'm not paying attention to what I ought to, and I'm likely to make a mistake as a result of it. And then there's a tendency to get distracted by little minutia that doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but it seems very important to your mind, and you can't let it go. And usually what's driving that is some type of emotion. I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm scared, whatever it is, but that object of that emotion is what I'm locked onto, and I can't let it go. And I can't be paying attention to more than one thing at a time. That's an important element of that concentration theory. If I'm on channel one, I can't be on anything else. If I'm focused on something that's irrelevant, I can't focus on something that is relevant and is going to get in my way. There was a very famous psychological research study done years ago called the White Bear Study. And what they did was they had two groups of participants in the experiment, so a control group and an experimental group. And both had the same task. They were given a list of 15 words and given 2 minutes to memorize those 15 words. And at the end of 2 minutes, the list was taken away, and they had to recall how many of those 15 words were up here in memory. Okay? And so the control group was basically said, here's your 15 words. You get 2 minutes. When it's done, we're going to ask you to recall as many as you can. With the experimental group, they said the same thing, but they added in at the end and said, oh, and by the way, we know from previous research that you can't allow yourself to think about white bears while you're focusing on memorizing the words. Well, as you might imagine, when the testing was all done, the control group did way better in terms of the recall. And when they talked to the experimental group, it was like, why do you think you didn't do it any better? And most of them said it's because I couldn't help but sit there and think about white bears as I was trying to do it. So it's an example of that kind of nonsense distraction, things that's not relevant. And what's important to understand is the way that you eliminate that is not by fighting it. It's by basically noticing it, saying to yourself, isn't that interesting that I'm thinking about white bears? But what I really need to be doing right now is thinking about this over here, as opposed to going, I'm not going to allow myself to think about white bears, which is only going to guarantee that the white bears are dominating your mindset. So a little rabbit hole there.
So the solution to the nonsense is awareness.
Exactly.
And then are there any tools that you provide that allow you to just let the white bear walk away?
Without question, the best tool for strengthening your ability to be focused on the right things at the right time is mindful meditation. It is like taking your brain to the gym. It's not about necessarily relaxation, although it might help you relax. It's not about stress relief. It's about teaching your brain how to be aware of what it is it's paying attention to. And when it gets distracted, and it will, how to notice that and then refocus yourself on what's important. So most mindful meditation is really just focusing on your breathing. And so there are probably 100 different smartphone apps that you can download these days. There's one called Calm. There's a big ecosystem called Headspace. And so you've got your smartphone, you pop your earbuds in, and you go through a 5-minute, 10-minute meditation. Most of them, again, are focused on just pay attention to your breathing. Mm-hmm. And so you start it out, and within very short order, you're going to notice that you're thinking about anything but your breathing. And what's important is you don't fight that. You just notice it, come back to focus on it. And for people, athletes, soldiers, business people who do that, they see a dramatic improvement in their ability to stay focused on the right things at the right time. Notice when they get distracted. It won't eliminate your propensity to be distracted. What it's going to do is it's going to help you notice that before it causes you performance problems, and then reorient yourself. So regardless of who we're working with, that is always one of our prescriptions, is you need to do that. And you bring that up in a room full of special operations guys, then the eyes start to roll, right? And they're imagining you're going to put the whale music on next, right? And everybody's going to hug. And I basically say, look, I know it sounds silly. I know you probably think it's bullshit, but here's my challenge to you. Do it for 30 days, once a day, 5 minutes for 30 days. And at the end of those 30 days, if you don't notice a difference, talk to me, because you'll be the first one that has ever committed to it and hasn't noticed it making a difference for them. And to this day, no one's come back after 30 days of actually doing it and said, I don't think it works for me.